Welcome to Screen Smash. I'm your host, Dan Morris, and joining me this evening, I have Nick McKay,
What up?
Louis Reza,
Wahoo! Sorry,
new
I'm
Mike,
still on last episode.
new Mike Louis Reza, and coming back to the show, joining us once again, we have Alex McCumbers. Hello, Alex.
Back by popular demand, me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah.
Ah, cha
That's great.
cha.
One of my favorite memes ever. That little possum that's just like, man.
Yes, welcome to the show. This is Screen Smash, CouchSoup's one and only video game podcast. You can catch us every Friday over on YouTube, CouchSoup. And you can watch us live on Twitch even and watch the show raw, right? Raw.
Raw and unfiltered.
Send it in raw.
And possibly slightly less quality because of Twitch reasons.
Very true. So tonight, Alex is here to join us in regaling and getting all whimsical, thinking about some of our childhood favorite video games. Which is interesting because when I started thinking about how we're going to go over this topic, it's like, well, what's childhood for you? Because childhood for some of us is a very specific category of video games, and for others, it might be a completely different category. So we could get some pretty interesting answers here. But to start us off, we're going to talk about the favorite games that we loved as kids. So who was going to take this one away? Nick, you want to get us started?
All right. I'll get us started. My favorite games as a kid, I think I gravitated towards like the 3D platformers, but like the sort of wholesome, family friendly 3D platformers. I loved like the Sonic games. I was a huge fan of the Sonic games. I loved the Spyro the Dragon games. Like Year of the Dragon is so good.
Mhm.
And I love those games, like the Crash Bandicoot games as well. I was addicted to those. I'm not so crazy about Crash Bandicoot now, and in terms of what they've done with it, but the games that I had, like that to me was like we all remember like the Saturday morning cartoons kind of thing. Like Crash Bandicoot for me was the Saturday morning gaming session, and I absolutely love that. Warped is like my absolute favorite. That's the third one with where you could use Coco and there was all the powers. Man, dude, Crash Bandicoot was good back in the day. But I also loved Jack and Daxter. I have to shout out that game as well. That game on the PS2 was, or that series of games on the PS2 was really 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 cool. But another like bunch of games I loved for like a very specific reason is the old Final Fantasies and like that sort of turn-based RPG era.
Mhm.
It was like even before Final Fantasy 7, there was a Digimon game as well
Ooh,
that
yeah.
I really loved, and I can never ever remember the name of this game, but I loved that Digimon game because it was like proper sort of
Explain it.
turn-based, kind of like
Was it the
kind of like
first one
it's
on
You get a
PS1?
bear? Was it a turn base there? And did you get a bear? Like a bear in a hat?
it yeah, that sounds familiar.
It's turn based, kind of like
Maybe it
a
was that
Final
one. I know
Fantasy
that
like 9
it's
presentation.
very much like a Final
It's
Fantasy
like
game.
3 things with a
And the
bear with a
turn-based.
hat. That's all you get.
Mm,
That is definitely Digimon World 3, unless you were raising a pet, which is the first one, or
Yeah.
you're doing like a mystery
Well,
dungeon,
Digimon
which is the
World
second
sounds.
one.
There was a lot of dungeon. I remember
You were
that.
in a little vehicle, and you had to
Remember a lot.
be like a little like drill vehicle thing. And
Yes.
yeah, okay, that's the second one. There's a Vidramon on the front of that one. I adore these games.
We
One.
found this game from my childhood. I'm so happy.
Memory,
Anyway, so that
core
game,
memory
so right,
unlocked.
so that turn-based RPG sort of like style of game, I loved, and for a very specific reason, because all of my friends at the time were playing all like the card games, like they were playing
Mm.
Pokemon and Magic the Gathering, and I loved the idea of these card games, like it was so cool, but for the life of me, I couldn't figure them out. Magic the Gathering is still one of the most confusing things I've ever seen in my life. And I could never figure out these card games, and I wanted to play them, but I couldn't. So from bye Louis. See you, bro.
Do you ever talk about magic?
I never said it was
Come on,
bad. I
man.
just said I couldn't understand it. I'm not smart enough. But I wanted to play these games so bad because I love the whole turn-based idea. So these RPG games like the Final Fantasies, the Digimon World 2, I love that because it felt
Mhm.
like I could kind of play these games and it was kind of that outlet for me. and I had this turn-based thing that I could play. So yeah, those are my games. I love those.
Yeah. Turn-based when we were kids were kind of a big deal because there's not a lot of like skill involved to make those games work, right? Like you could be
It's
bad at
absolutely,
Sonic,
you had
you
to
could
think
be bad at
you
Mario.
come on, you have to think about it. Mm.
You'll figure out Pokemon eventually.
I broke my hand. Jesus
Oh,
Christ. Like my wrist like about 20 years ago because I'm young. And there was this point where actually, go figure, we were showing off our cool tech to each other. And here's my PSP.
Yeah.
This is
ESPs.
my souped up PSP that my awesome cousin got me. But anyway, my first PSP, I had actually had like I had this thing that I was trying so
I'm
hard
gonna stay with my Vita.
to to find what's it called again? To find turn-based games, because since I couldn't really operate with one wrist, I was just playing the game like this, and I couldn't do my fast pace as usual. And so I was looking for those turn-based games, and I remember I had turned away from them for so long, maybe about like 5 years at the time or something like that. But so long when you're a kid, that like it was this random huge surge of nostalgia that even as like a 22, 21-year-old Louis was just like, oh my god, I remember like and yeah, man, like those turn-based, like if you get a good one that actually makes you strategize, one that actually makes you think, where it's like, do I have to waste a whole turn just healing, or do I like go
Yeah,
for
dude.
broke, man? Like,
ESP's
it
got
feels
some
like
good
being on
ones.
the line, like in football, where it's like, all right, you're however inches and yards, and like do you go for it, or do you just get the kickoff? Like, what do you do, man? Like, god, I remember that.
A Final Fantasy Hail Mary is super satisfying.
I remember playing like Final Fantasy X, I think was when I really started to use that, where you start like you waste a whole turn of your whole party just to buff and debuff and heal,
Mm.
and then you go ham like the next turn. Like I love that sort of like bait and switch and strategy.
I honestly never played a turn-based game until Final Fantasy VII. I think that was the first time I played a
Wow.
turn-based game, and I remember being like, "What is this? What am I doing? What's with the bar? Blah, this is slow and weird." And yeah, I don't think I ever played any of the other. I don't believe I ever tried a proper turn-based game before that that I
That
can
that
remember.
definitely was my introduction. I'm not gonna lie. That was my intro. But after that, I was like, whatever game is turn-based, man. This is real video games, dude. You guys don't even know. Yeah, yeah.
I think when I play.
I get smarter. Okay. I don't like
You
playing these
literally
games
do.
for like
Like,
children. Like
I owe a lot of my reading comprehension and love of literature because I was just inundated with it, even in video games, because
See,
I
now
love
I've
Final Fantasy
actually
and Pokemon and stuff.
I've said that before too, that I've
down for
actually used
that.
video games as a like this taught me things and helped me become smarter because of classic games like Metal
Mhm.
Gear Solid and Resident Evil.
Mm.
I remember telling teachers about Resident Evil because I was like, they'd be like, "Why do you get so into these video games?" And I'm like explaining it to them, and I would tell them like, "Well, there's a lot of reading in these games," and they're like,
Mhm.
"Well, how so?" And I'd explain to them how in Resident Evil you pick up like the notes and the memos, and you'd be reading all this lore about what happened. And I'm like, then you've got Metal Gear on the other side that's like going deep and hard on science and information and technology. And like I heard
History. There's a
so
lot
many
of
words.
history in
There's a
this.
lot of history in Metal Gear. I've
Yeah.
also heard massive words I've never heard before
Mhm.
playing Metal Gear. And it's like, what does this even mean? What is nuclear? I know that's an argument.
That's a hard thing to
Nuclear.
Nuclear.
look in the dictionary. Just
Nuclear.
like,
Nuclear.
What's DNA? What's genomes? Like what are all these things they're talking about? Like
mhm.
but yeah, they
Okay.
go so hard on all that stuff.
When I first played Parasite Eve, I swear on my life, when like I played it when the game came out. Like I was waiting. I remember waiting for it to come out, and I got it and I played it, and I remember in school I was learning about mitochondria. I was learning about cell division. I was learning about
Hmm.
all of that at the same time. And so like I remember explaining the game to somebody, like, like, oh, people just generally know this information, and they're like, wait. Is that possible? Like what? Like what? Yeah, of course it's possible. I mean, we're just learning. I'm in 7th grade, you jerk. Of course it's possible. Like, man, to this day, when I hear people going like, "Is that even true?" I'm like, "Yeah, yeah." Oh, right. They
Can I
didn't hear it at the
share?
same time.
I have an interesting anecdote to go along with that too, because I spent so much of my childhood playing video games and consuming any video game I could. And there was this
Mhm.
weird time for me when I had gone into college. I went to college a little late. So I was a little bit older by the time I went to college. And I was in the classrooms with, like 17, 18-year-olds fresh out of high school. And I was in my early 20s, maybe later. And I remember going into one of my classrooms, and I forget which class it was, but the teacher was talking about like Greek mythology subject material, and she said something about what's a gorgon? Like she was talking about
Mm.
gorgons,
Yeah.
and I'm like, oh yeah, absolutely, gorgon, just like from God of War with the gorgons, and it's like, just like the Greek mythological beast that I'm blanking on now. I can't
Are
remember.
also called Gorgons.
Yeah,
Medusa's the
Medusa,
character.
that's the one I'm looking for, Medusa.
Yeah.
Mm,
And I literally had a
uh,
group of these kids fresh out of high school look at me and go, "How did you know that?" And I'm like, "How do you not know that?"
Mhm.
Like, I learned that from God of War.
I had something similar in like we were studying the Gilgamesh poem in one of our literature classes in
Mm,
college, and my teacher had pulled up all these different images of various pop culture and like images of Gilgamesh. One of them was from Final Fantasy VIII. And I'm like, Professor,
mm,
did you know that one's from a video game? And he's like, what? And I'm like, has been in that video game series for years.
mm.
And so it was interesting to see like the original story of that type of thing. And that's what I remember growing up with was like, the Final Fantasy series. I really loved medieval stuff. I played a lot of Pokemon. Basically, the Game Boy was like my pride and joy growing up. And then I loved the ability to like take my Game Boy game and put it in my Super Nintendo. It was the coolest thing I could imagine. And
Oh,
this
it was
is
a Super
me,
Game
this
Boy.
little me. I was like
Oh,
8.
yeah.
I remember being extremely sick one Easter. Couldn't even go outside while everybody's doing their thing. Stayed indoors, played Pokemon Silver, found Lugia on my own, and immediately called my friend because it was the most mind blowing thing I'd ever seen. I'm like, you're never gonna believe this. Here's how you get to it.
Just talking about like games in school, I remember playing like the Assassin's Creed games. And like
Mm,
they were pretty historically accurate apart from the assassins and
sure.
stuff. But like it was cool you go to school and like I remember playing Assassin's Creed 2 and we were learning about the Renaissance in history class. And we were like, yeah, hey, Leonardo da Vinci's in the game and like this guy's in the game and this guy's in the game. And then like I think the one of my friends said one day to the teacher, like Leonardo, like I think she asked the question of like, what did Da Vinci do? And she was trying to say like, he painted the Mona Lisa, he did this and this, and he's like, no, he helped Ezio with his gadgets. She was like, that's not in the textbook.
He made a flying machine.
Ezio what? Ezio Auditore Differenze. What? You
Ezio
don't
what?
know this guy? Come on.
Ezio the Ortore different. How do you not know this guy?
And he has an uncle. His name is Mario.
It's a me, Mario.
Now you can get like an educational mode in some of those Assassin's Creed games. I think that started
Yeah,
in the Egyptian one. It's crazy.
yeah.
Mm,
Origins had that for the first time.
I've
yeah.
always been a champion of games in education and literature. Like I think games literacy is still a ways off, but I can remember being little and being like, no, this is where our stories are gonna come from is games. Books too, but
Yeah.
like it's also going to be games, just as it is movies.
I've been an advocate of gaming for mental health for a long time too, because I
Mhm.
eventually went on and got my bachelor's degree in psychology, and I wrote my final thesis on usage of video games for mental health and therapy. And like it was a matter of like breaking it down to like, is it good, is it bad? But I was basically
Sure.
saying that I think in the long run, and it's been since then, like video games are constantly being put to use for physical therapy, mental therapy. There's all these different
Visual therapy
usage.
too. Mhm.
Yeah, so many different things that video games are able to help people with. Um, yeah, I was going to back up to go back to our core topic at the moment. We're saying like our favorite games as as kids,
Mhm.
Yeah.
which Louis, I know you started to touch on a little bit. We haven't quite like started going on it specifically, but I'll just go ahead and roll in of like as a kid, like some of my fondest memories were with my Super Nintendo, my N64, my PlayStation 1, Donkey Kong Country.
Yeah.
all time,
Mhm.
Oh,
absolute favorite. Like, I can't not get nostalgic. I can't not get just like happy tears in my eyes thinking about Donkey Kong Country and the fond memories I have playing that game. And then leading into like, I was a diehard Nintendo kid when I was growing up, and like we had Nintendos,
Same.
we had Nintendo, Super Nintendo, 64, all of that. And it wasn't
Mhm.
until a friend of mine who had a PlayStation showed me Resident Evil 2 for the first time, and that opened me up to Resident Evil and PlayStation and all these other phenomenal games out there. And that's where I
Yeah.
got into playing Crash Bandicoot, Spyro. Like Spyro was my jam. There was this really weird, like one-off action adventure game I played. I think it was called Kingsley's Quest on the
King's Quest
PS1. Is it
from
King's?
Software. King's Quest. Yep.
No, not King's Quest. Not
Oh,
from
no, no, no,
software.
no. King's Field.
No, not that.
First person dungeon thingy?
No, this was a cute action platform where you play as a little fox who's a knight. I think it's Kingsley. Like his name is Kingsley. I think. I have to double check that. I've looked into it before and I've forgotten since
You and I
then.
were talking about this last time, right? It was
I
basically
believe
Sounds
so.
Legend of
familiar.
I think I
Zelda.
mentioned
Are you
it.
sure it's PlayStation and not like
It
Kingsley's
was
Adventure? Does that mean anything to you? He's
it's a little fox.
Kingsley's
A little fox.
Adventure. Yeah, that
Yes.
sounds very
Yeah,
familiar.
Yeah.
yeah,
I think I rented that game on a whim once from Blockbuster, and like I was just obsessed with it for a while.
yeah.
That's the other thing I was gonna mention too. Renting video games.
Renting games was huge.
Oh,
And also
dude.
terrible for me because I didn't live next to a Blockbuster. I lived next to a convenience store who rented games, but they were
Yeah.
always scratched to hell. The amount of times I walked back and
Ugh.
forth from my grandma's house just trying to see if any of the games would work is astounding. Like I am so fascinated with Breath of Fire 3. Never played it.
That's
Past the
like
first like 10 minutes.
the biggest thing that sucked about that too was when I was a kid and we didn't have a Blockbuster for a long time, and the only places you could rent games were there was a few video stores that rented games, but they usually didn't have a very big library.
Mhm.
And then there was like a grocery store at the time that rented video games too.
Mhm.
But there was always they either didn't have a very good selection, or you would see that they had a slot for like that damn diehard game you wanted to play, like Maximum Carnage. Like I want to play Maximum Carnage, but it was never there.
Yep.
Ever.
I think I remember a grocery store carrying Super Nintendos, and they had Mario RPG and Super Godzilla. And I
Mhm.
finally convinced my mom to let me like get one, or dad or whoever. And they're like, "All right, pick one off the shelf." And I picked Super Godzilla. Dumb.
Yeah,
Fair
I've played it.
enough.
I know.
I'm nostalgic for it, but God, what a choice, right? Mm.
Yeah. But I remember that too. Like there's so many games that I would have never played if it wasn't for rentals. And like I remember just being so obsessed with the FX chip when that came out, with like FX chip
Hmm.
games for the Super Nintendo. I'm like, I had to play Stunt Racer FX. I loved that game. And then Star Fox came out. I love Star Fox. And
Mm.
yeah,
How soon do you think you were aware of the tech of games? Like, at what point were you like, Super FX chip? That's where it's at.
it was probably about that time when I started to put together the notion of like, 16 bits. The thing
Mm.
has 16 bits process. Like I didn't know all the
Yeah.
nomenclature back then, but it was my ability at the time to start thinking about the
'Cause I don't think I was
power.
aware of that stuff until like late PS1, maybe PS2. But even as a kid, when we went from Super Nintendo to N64, I was like, this is worse. And I want to play my 2D games more than I do my 3D games.
I mean, I was initially impressed with the 64 when it came out. The first time I played
Mhm.
Mario 64, I was like, oh, wow, this looks so good. It's so incredible. And then games like Turok came along, and I'm like, it's all chunky and blocky, but it looks cool. I like it, you know. But
Smash
I
Bros.
was
is my first
like,
one.
yes, Smash Bros. Was so good. Like, I was aware of the FX chip. I was aware. I knew that was a thing that those games were utilizing
Interesting.
back then. So
Because I
it was,
think Tech TV became a thing around late PS1, early PS2. And that's when I started like understanding like the game industry.
I don't think I came across Tech TV until later, though. And like, I don't
I
think
remember
we
when
didn't
it
have
transitioned.
cable. We had a satellite dish. So it
Yeah, we
was,
did too.
woo.
I did not care about any of the intricacies until at least high school. Other than that, I was like,
Mhm.
was it fun? Shut up. Was it fun? That's all I cared about.
I was reading reviews and
Yeah.
like looking at guides and like looking at game news and reading Game Informer and stuff. That was definitely
Yeah.
high school for me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I had a subscription to
Mm.
GamePro, Game Informer, any and every magazine I can get
PlayStation
hold of.
magazine I got. Yep.
Every time we went to a grocery
Mm.
store, I was grabbing any magazine that had a demo disc in it. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
What really kind of opened up me again, I'm a I grew up fairly impoverished in one of the most impoverished states, in one of the most impoverished counties in the entire U.S. West Virginia, for anybody who wants to know. But thankfully, there was a lot of secondhand markets like pawn stores, yard sales, and I was usually a console generation behind. So my dad would come home with like stacks of NES games that he got for $20, and it was great because that's where I learned like I like variety when I play games. Like I don't like playing the same thing over and over and over again, except for very few select titles, which explains the ADHD that I've suddenly like realized I probably have. So I
Oh,
played
I'll tell
like
you. Don't worry.
the original Ninja Turtles. I played a first time I understood what a bad video game was Orb 3D on the NES. That game's horrible. I don't even know what's going on in that game.
Mm.
It's bad.
I played the original ET games, so
Wizards and Warriors 2, the one with Fabio on the cover. I played a crap ton of that. Castlevania, like the NES, I had all these like hand-me-down things. Same thing happened with the Super Nintendo and the Game Boy and so on and so forth. And so I always loved variety. I played such a like varied mix of things. I borrowed like consoles from people. That was a big thing. A good time.
My cousins and I would kind of interchange, so each of us would get a different console, and then it's like, oh, but I always got short-ended. I was like, yeah, here, try this one. Never got the console.
But the games I spent the most time with probably was the Game Boy, Link's Awakening DX, Pokemon Silver. I would play those in the woods while hunting on mute. You want to talk about a satisfying way to just sit in the woods, sitting in a tree stand with just your Game Boy, doing your little adventure or whatever, and just listening for deer to show up? That's pretty enjoyable. I'd still do that. I don't bow hunt as often anymore, but that's what I would do. I would get home from school, climb a tree, and then wait for deer, and usually not see anything. But I'd play a lot of Zelda.
I loved my Game Boy too. It's so funny too because like you mentioned Zelda. Like I had my Game Boy as a kid. Like I remember getting the Game Boy and be like, oh my god, I can play video games on the go. And I had like the big ass fanny pack that you kept the Game Boy in. And I
Mine
was
had
like,
a Blastoise
this
on
is
it.
so cool. And then I was like super obsessed with the
Were you
Jurassic Park.
rad? You
I
were
was
rad, weren't you?
definitely rad.
Super rad.
I need to bring
Tubular.
back like the little
Wicked rad.
pouches.
Yeah.
I love these things.
Yeah, dude.
That's like all the hidden levels in Super Mario World. They hit like all those ridiculous words.
Okay, so when I was a kid, my cousin came over. I rarely see this cat. I don't even know where this dude is anymore. He was from Ohio, which was like this mystical far off land to me when I was a child. He came in one time and was like, "Oh, you got all these video games. Sick. Do you want to play Mario 3?" I'm like, "Sure." And he's like, the whistle was my favorite part. And I'm like, "What whistle?" And he proceeds to show me the part where you like drop down from the background and get the whistle. And I was like, "What the fuck? Like, what do you mean you can do this?" And then I was like, well, "Do you know how to beat Mario World? I can't do it. You have to get the cape. I and it's hard." And he's like, "What do you mean you have to get the cape? Throw up." And I'm like, "What do you mean throw up?" He's like, "Take your shell and throw it up." I'm like, "How do you do that?" I never knew. I played the entire game, had no idea. And then like, because I was trying to grab the cape, run real fast, and then fly up and drop it as a little flyby. And that's hard to do. But if you just grab the little Mecha Koopa and throw him upwards, it's like a super easy boss fight. So people showing me little tricks was something that I just adored from my childhood.
I thought about that earlier too. I was thinking about all the things that I've learned about games, and I'm like, how did I figure that out, or how did I learn about that, especially pre-internet? Because there's so many things about games like that that I either figured out on my own, heard somewhere, read somewhere, or just know, and I don't remember how I know it.
Yeah.
Like even the trick in Metal Gear Solid to put your controller in the second port on the
Sure.
PlayStation, I never experienced the game telling you to do that until recently, but I knew to do it as a kid somehow, and
I
I
think
don't
it's in the
remember.
What
manual or
is what is
something.
the trick on that?
There's a boss fight against one of the enemies where you actually have to take your controller out of the number 1 port and put it in port number 2, because otherwise the boss, you cannot hit him because he reads your mind and
He's
sees all
psychic.
the attacks coming.
Psycho Mantis.
Yeah.
Crazy cool boss
By
fight.
the way,
What? So that's actually
just to blow your mind even farther, that is the only time in that game that you can do that with port 2. You
Yeah.
cannot do it before and you cannot do it after. It only works for that fight.
Oh yeah.
It's cool, man.
Yeah.
What?
Did you
That
know
is
you
so cool.
This is something Nick and I talked about offline earlier today. We are talking about Nick playing Metal Gear because he's never played the games. And we're like, yeah, we're gonna have to do
I did
that.
that recently. That's a fun experience.
Um,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I need to give it a try.
so much. I was gonna. I need to rewind real quick because I was gonna say there was a time when I got my Game Boy as a kid, and my grandma, being a grandma, was like, I don't know what to get him, so she most likely walked into a Toys R Us, said, "My kid's got a Game Boy. What do I get him?" And they're like, "Here's the hot game that's available right now," and she gave me Link's Awakening, the
Mm,
original
sweet.
Link's Awakening.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what the game was supposed to be. I didn't know how to play the game. I
Mhm.
walked around that starting village for days. I got frustrated and turned it off and said, I'm never playing this game again. Thanks, Grandma.
I figured it out because I think I read the manual, and if I'm not mistaken, I think Link to the Past was my first exposure to that franchise. And a friend of mine was like, "Oh, this is the coolest thing ever. We have this really big strategy guide. It's got all these secrets. It's really neat." And then, so when I saw that the Game Boy version of Zelda was available, I'm like, "Oh, well, maybe that'd be the thing to get." And that's one of my favorite Zelda games.
I
Period.
went
I
back
think
and played Link's Awakening
they're
and then
so
Link's
good.
Awakening 2 or Link's Awakening DX. It's easily one of my favorite Zelda games of all
Yeah,
time now.
it holds up
And
incredibly
I
well.
think it's hilarious that the first time I played, I was like, I don't get this. What do I do? And I gave up on it.
Final Fantasy Tactics for me. I didn't know that when you place your little soldier dudes before each match, that you could pick more soldier dudes by pressing the shoulder buttons. So I was like, this is the hardest video game I've ever played in my life because I would sit down Ramza and then Delita would show up, and that's all I had. And that first fight is really hard if you just have the two dudes. I'm
Mm.
like, this game sucks. This game's
So you're
impossible.
making it Dark Souls hard on yourself.
And then a friend who
Right.
knew it was like, put down more units. I'm like, what do you mean?
What?
I've definitely had those kinds of things. Most of the stuff that I learned was from other people, but also like Dan and I have talked about this extensively, and I have brought it up on this show before several times that this is why modern games kind of piss me off because it's like there was one, maybe two games that you had to play when you were a kid. That was it. You had the time to be able to expend
Yeah.
hours upon hours
Mhm.
upon hours to learn one level, exactly where and when you're supposed to jump, how far you're supposed to go, just to make that one little thing count. That now I'm like, are you fucking serious? Do you have any idea what my backlog looks like? No, I don't care. I don't want to do that. Just teach me now. Yeah, now we need strategy.
Yeah,
Anyway,
patience
getting
is
mad again.
lower. I hear Tunic recreates that through its game design.
Yeah.
But so there's a couple like standout moments to me in my childhood that kind of define the types of games that I like. It's getting that stack and the variety. It's doing the Game Boy thing and playing on the go and kind of just always having video games on the mind. But there was a moment where I was hanging out with my buddy Timmy, and he knows the story well. And his sister was older than us, and I thought she was very cool because she sat down and she's like, "Tim, I want to use a PlayStation for a little bit. I know you guys are like hanging out or whatever, but I'd love to use a PlayStation." And I'm like, "Oh, well, what are you playing on it?" And she goes, "I'm playing Final Fantasy VIII right now and Legend of Dragoon, and I'm stuck on both." And I'm like, "Well, maybe me and Tim can help figure it out." We were like 9 or 10 or whatever. And so she loads up Legend of Dragoon, the Viragia, the Virage fight that's shortly followed by like the Fire Phoenix thing. I specifically remember the scenes and just the way the like characters came together and all the different animations and how the Dragoon outfits were. And then I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. What is this? And she's like, these are RPGs.
Mhm.
If you like this, I have more things to show you. And so she pulled out Final Fantasy VIII, showed me all the different summons. She pulled out Final Fantasy VII, showed me those animations and everything. Did
Ah,
9, and I'm like, I need these. How do I find these?
down the rabbit hole.
And so from
Yup.
that point on, and then it occurred to me, well, this is Final Fantasy 9. Where's the other 8? And that's when I got into video game history because I asked that question to myself. I Googled it or whatever the equivalent Ask Jeeves at the time or whatever. And then I found out that they had remade Final Fantasy 1 and 2 for the PlayStation. So I went to Toys R Us. I got that DS and a copy of Final Fantasy Origins for $20. And I loved that copy of Final Fantasy. And that's where I got into like, I want to know where games come from. This was accentuated by the introduction of emulators, which I wrote about in SNES Omnibus Volume 1, which is a lot of these stories are going to be in that book as well.
All right, we have to do it now. CouchSoup does not condone any usage of any kind of emulation or anything that is deemed as non-purchasables by anybody anywhere at any time. Thank you very much. Continue the show. Sorry, it's a thing. We gotta.
So I was
did.
emulating all my favorite PlayStation 1 games the other day, and
Your mic sounds so good.
It does. It really does well for you,
it
man.
sounded perfect, actually. That was like people are gonna think that's like professional voiceover. So, anyways, I was showing Louis last week how to do emulation.
Yeah,
I did it.
In high school, we had this thing called the Career Center, and this is the first time I like had a classroom with people from outside of region. And so it was like our county and then the neighboring county, and we went kind of in the middle. And there was like a tech center, and there was a networking class, and there was computer hardware stuff. And we like all these incredibly smart like Glenville kids came over, and they were like winning competitions and hacking shit and doing all this. And of course, I was still learning like the basics of computers. And I was like, oh god, do you know what I remember playing? Pokemon. And I wish I could finish Super Metroid. I don't have my cartridge anymore. And not even looking up. This kid across the room playing Unreal Tournament, land together with 3 or 4 of the other kids from their county, goes, emulate it over his shoulder. And I'm like, what does that mean? A lot of my stories start with, I don't know what you're talking about.
I'm starting to notice that.
he explained to me what this magical thing was. And that is why I'm a game journalist and a games media today. Because again, what other Metroid games are there? What other Final Fantasy games are there? I could emulate Game Boy Advance, arcades, Super Nintendos, like anything basically before the N64, I could do on my crappy little Windows XP computer, which I also learned how to write on. And so I was just like taking in as much as I could. Like, give me every single little game. I played like ROM hacks, fan translations. That's how I played all the Fire Emblems that are not available in the States. And so, like, I have, since that time, always been a staunch defender of emulation. I think it's very important.
It's the best method of game preservation there is, honestly.
Yes.
Well, yeah, the companies aren't going to do that, so we might as well.
I wanted to shout out because I was going to say you unlocked a core memory for me, too, because now I'm remembering back in the day in, like, 6th grade during computer lab, whenever the computer or the teacher wasn't paying attention, the first thing we all did was hop onto emulation sites, and we all started playing, like, that was the first time I ever played Metroid, was emulating it on a website. They were like, oh shit, we're playing Metroid, bro.
So
like,
that same class, we all had these like workbooks we had to do. And we got it down to where he'd be like, all right, do chapters 17 through 24. There were like 6 of us. Each of us would do a chapter. We would share each other's work. We would immediately play emulators in Unreal. And that was our class.
See, now that is smart, dude. That is street smarts.
He knew it, and he's like, you know what?
School kids.
That's clever, and y'all are learning about computers, so go for it.
Dude, I remember being in like computer class where like the kids, when I was in like, I don't know, I guess you'd call it middle school. But like the kids in high school, they were doing computer classes, and they installed like when the teacher wasn't looking, they installed a bunch of games on the computers, and then we would get in there like 10 years old. We'd like, let's try these games out. I remember they emulated, I think it was Tekken 2, and you could play it like co-op or on the same keyboard. So like, you know, like the one guy's on the side of the keyboard, the other guy's on the side. And we're just like mashing buttons and thinking this is the greatest thing we've ever played. It was just the coolest thing. And then like guys installed the Half-Life and that whole like base where it came with Counter-Strike and Blue Shift and like a whole bunch of things. We ended up playing that multiplayer as well. And we're like, this is the coolest thing ever. Oh man, that was a core memory unlock for me as well. Computer class in school, dude. Yes.
My computer class sucked. You were like, all right,
I can type
this sentence way faster than you.
My whopper of computer lab stories.
That was an important class for me too, was typing.
Yeah, no. Like, I was the show off in that class because I could out type anybody, and then the other kids from like the advanced classes came in and I'm very mediocre. Cool.
We had a couple kids who could hit like upper 150s. We had one dude who pushed 200, and we're like, this is insane.
I was like at like 70, and I'm like, yeah, bitches suck it. And then like, yeah, the 130 and the 150 guys came in, and I'm like,
yeah.
Oh,
I'll leave. There's the door.
But I remember getting like an Xbox 360 controller, plugging it in, mapping it to emulation, and it just working. And I was like, this is incredible. And then I also got like a little USB Super Nintendo style controller that I used a lot. But we played a lot of like the beat 'em ups and fighting games. like Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and Street Fighter Alpha 3 and Third Strike, and then the Capcom Dungeons and Dragons beat 'em up was a favorite in my friend group. We had so much fun with that.
I wanted to ask as well, Dan, you're talking about you got Link's Awakening as a gift from someone. I wanted to say, like, what cool gifts did you get as a kid, like from family
Ooh.
members? I'll never forget one year for my birthday. I think it was in like 2005 when this came out. I got my gran went into a video game store and she's like, my grandson, he plays PlayStation 2. I know that, but like, what's like the newest, coolest game or whatever? And on my birthday, I get this, like, I know it's a game because you can see the shape and I
Mhm.
open it. My grandmother bought me Devil May Cry 3. And I
Yo.
was like, and
Nice.
Damn.
it had just because my birthday is in February and that game came out in like, I think February or somewhere around there. And I saw my grand in like the middle of March. So that game was like 2, 3 weeks old, and I had Devil May Cry 3. I believe I played it the whole weekend and went to school on Monday and said, guys, guess what I played this weekend? And everyone was like, "Yeah, dude." Because how, oh,
Dude,
dude,
that's
Devil May Cry
awesome.
3 as well. It's like, oh, it's so good.
See, I'm sad to report that other than the fact that my grandmother got me Link's Awakening, which I did not know what it was, so I didn't appreciate it at the time. I don't think I've ever received a video game as a gift that I didn't ask for specifically, ever.
No.
Same.
It's such a magical thing. My grandma
Because
found me Goemon's Great Adventure on
ah,
N64.
well, yeah, like, oh my god, go
Ooh.
on. Oof, that's a
I
shout.
know. I was
Oh,
like, this is a banger. Good
so
job, grandma.
I
Dude,
grew up in a
grannies know what to buy, bro.
I grew up
Yeah.
in a town and with a family who was like they looked down on video games very negatively. So it was very much like I only got video games when I asked for them for like my birthday and Christmas, and that's
Yeah.
it. Like I got the games I asked for pretty
Yeah.
much. That's about it.
My dad always was
Exactly.
harsh on it, even in college when I was like, Dad, eventually I'm going to work in games. I called him recently and was like, Dad, I made it. And he's like, you know what? You're right. You
Mm.
proved me wrong because I didn't think you would do it. And here you are. But like,
Suck a
Hell yeah.
even
crow.
though he was like
Yeah. Eat
really,
it.
he was really harsh about like the time I spent with games. He would always get me games. So, and he was a big electronics guy and he loved the Atari when he was younger. And so like the reason I have games is because he got the regular Nintendo, mom and dad did. And that's how I got into it. I was at the age of literally 2, I was playing the NES.
Mm.
But the gift giving thing is kind of an interesting thing because I remember around like my 5th birthday for one Christmas, I got a Game Boy with like Kirby and Jurassic Park and Donkey Kong Land 2. And so the Game Boy was like a big part of that. I got some Power Rangers that year. I got a bike that same year, and then I got a puppy. It was literally like the best Christmas present ever, and I was very spoiled that year. I don't know what happened or what I did to receive such a like cavalcade of gifts. All I know is I think dad was mad that mom spent so much money. So like that was a thing.
I think
But
the
it was
closest
a great Christmas.
I think the closest I can come to a gift that I wasn't expecting at least was our Super Nintendo
Mm.
because I think we had an Atari and we had a Nintendo, but I don't remember how we came about getting those. I think they might have been hand me downs or pawn shop purchases or like they were given to us by people that we know because I remember just having those.
Yeah.
But I distinctly and will always fondly remember the Christmas that we got our Super Nintendo because A, I had no idea where you're getting it. And B, it was that after we've opened everything, it's like last surprise gift where
Really.
everything was already done. We did all the presents. And then like my mom was like, "Oh, we got to show you guys something downstairs." And she opened the door to the basement and boom, there's the Super Nintendo sitting at the top of the stairs. And we're just like,
Uh,
"What?" Like
Yep.
there was that one, time that we had with that.
so yeah, I'll never forget the day my dad came home with the PlayStation 1. Like, it was like
Hmm.
we weren't like we didn't have, like, a lot of money, but we had, like, no video game consoles at the time, we had nothing, and I always went over to my friend's house and played, like, their PlayStations, their GameCubes, whatever they had, so, like, I was like, "Oh, man, I wish I had a game console at home or
Yeah.
something," and then my dad came home the one day with, like, this massive box, and then we are like, "What the hell's he got? What the hell's he got?" It's like, "Hey, it's a PlayStation 1," and my sister and I just, like, freaked out. We were so excited. We like hooked it up. Took like 45 minutes because the PlayStation 1 was so confusing. But that was just like the
Yeah, it's a
coolest
weird
moment,
one.
man.
And we like I remember My sister never really cared for video games, and so any of the video game stuff came to me. I remember getting the PlayStation 1. I got the PlayStation 1 with Crash Bandicoot because
Nice.
it was that new. And
Ooh.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
want
Look
the
at
little
it.
screen for them. I want one of those.
For those of you
Yeah,
who've
dude,
never
those are
seen
Yeah,
one of
nice.
right,
these,
right. Yeah, yeah. And then so that was one of
That's the
them.
slim.
it is.
Yeah, that's the upgraded
cute
version. So I got the original one. I remember that, but I also kind of remember a little bit that my dad was still into those things too. Like
Yep.
when he got the Nintendo, the NES, I was like you, I was like maybe 4 or 5, I want to say, and it wasn't for me. It
Yeah.
was not for me. Yeah, that was for his ass. Yeah,
Fair enough. Yep.
when you get home from school and like you see him playing your toy, you're like, Dad,
When my
hey
when my parents
Dad.
split up, he got a
Look, Dad.
PlayStation so that I'd have something to do at his house, and he had a wrestling game and a hunting game. He's
Oh,
like,
yeah,
they're fun. I've given them a go.
yeah, he bought me games, and
Yep.
then I come back and see him playing. Like, you son of a
But
gun.
when it was like when the N64 and the PlayStation 1 hit the market, the PS1, a lot of people don't remember this, but it was the bargain option because
Mm.
the games are cheaper by a
Mm.
lot. And so when I was like, "Oh, I want to get the new video game console," and Dad's like, "Oh, which one? You know, there's a couple different ones." And so the Walmart kiosks and stuff, you play on those. I'm like, "Oh, I really want an N64." And Dad's like, "Are you sure?" They're expensive, and every single game is twice as expensive as the PS1. I really would love for you to get the PS1 instead. And so I saved all my money. I got the N64. I couldn't even afford a game. I sat that box in my bedroom for like 6 months and then finally got Smash Brothers. Like it was
That's
torture.
brutal.
I think
Ah.
the only reason why I got the PlayStation over the Xbox, apart from the fact that that was what my parents. Now, thanks for ruining that illusion. I'm like, oh, they love me. They're like, no, you're a cheap bastard. But now, I remember thinking like the N64 is fantastic. It's got some phenomenal games, but I just liked the PlayStation because I
I
had
liked it
done
way
Mario, I
better
had done
afterwards.
Legend of
Yep.
Zelda, yeah. But and ever since
Mhm.
I was a PlayStation guy, even when Xbox came out, it did not turn my head, and I always
Spyro.
knew that I like these they're not independent. I like these games that are specified toward individual, and that's what I've
Mhm.
always about PlayStation. Now everything has changed. I knew that Xbox was always about the community. That's great for online.
Multiplayer.
It had the hardest processor that could actually keep up with it. And then Nintendo was for the whole family. And I was like, no, fuck all of you guys. I want to play these games only for me and nobody else. So PlayStation it was.
It's the better
Selfish
option.
system. It's the selfish system, but I
Final
love
Fantasy
it.
Tactics, all the Final Fantasies, Spyro. I
Yeah.
loved Gundam Battle Assault 2 just for the visuals. I thought that game was sick.
Oh,
Mega Man
Remember that game.
X5, still one of my favorite games, even though it's like the one most people dislike. Man, dude, Mega Man Legends, like the amount of games on the PS1 that I think are still fantastic is staggering.
Great. I want to cut you off real quick because we do actually have another section to talk about some of our
Uh-oh.
favorite games that were not
yeah.
necessarily good games, and we're kind of going down that hole. So I was like, let's go ahead and transition to now some of the games that we might have loved as kids that might not have been great too, but we're still going to talk about the games that we love.
Got an underrated one. I read about this in the SNES Omnibus. Magical Quest starring Mickey Mouse, Super Nintendo. It was made by Capcom. I have so many
course.
fond memories playing that with my
I
cousins.
played that game. I think I played that.
Like a platformer. It's got a great art direction. It's
Is it
so
side
cute.
scrolling?
Yeah, it's a side scroller. There's
Okay,
incredible boss fights. It's like a challenging game, but not like extremely hard. Around that same
Capcom made
time,
so many good games back then.
yeah, around that same time, I got into Street Fighter because, you know, stack of games, we had some stuff. And so my cousin came over and he brought Mickey Mouse, and I'm like, this is incredible. I love this. He brought Donkey Kong. I'm like, this is incredible. And then I had Street Fighter, and that's when we learned, like, oh, we love fighting games. So we played that and TMNT Tournament Fighters for hours. And that was the only like fighting game person I could like play with because nobody in my community wanted to play fighting games. We didn't even have arcades in most places. And so like me and my cousin playing Street Fighter on the Super Nintendo was my exposure to fighting games. And like I've been in kind of like fascinated by them ever since.
Oh yeah, I got super into fighting games too with Street Fighter, and I remember playing pretty much any and every fighting game I could get my hand on, and there were some bad ones.
I
back
don't think
then.
Mortal Kombat's very good.
No, the original Mortal Kombat, no.
Primal Rage, I always wanted
It
to
was
like.
gimmicky.
I remember Primal Rage. I remember playing that on the Super Nintendo, and I was super obsessed with it because I'm like, oh, it's got monkeys and dinosaurs, and they
Yeah.
battle, and there's blood. I got to play this.
Do you remember Biofreaks or Mace on the N64?
I know them, but I don't think I've ever played
really
those.
familiar.
I played them and I was like, oh, fighting games are worse when they come to 3D.
I like let me try to think oh right, I was actually just talking to my cousin about this. He had the Die Hard trilogy.
Welcome to the party, pal.
Oh,
And we
interesting.
loved that game. And
I love
when
that
then,
game.
and then
Yeah,
I grew
dude.
up. Yeah, we talked about this. I grew up and I was like, this was like one of the worst rated games like ever. Everyone was like, it's dog shit, it's horrible.
But it's
this,
so
it's that.
fun.
I was like,
You
who
love
would
it.
give this game a bad score? Are you kidding? Have you
Speaking of
played it?
Die Hard.
Oh my god, that's
Yeah.
apocalypse. This was the trilogy one. This was
Yeah,
the
yeah.
trilogy.
Well, this is a whole separate game, but it's got Bruce Willis in it. That's
yeah. But man, like we were obsessed with.
No,
that
I had
stupid
that
game.
too. I had the Die Hard trilogy.
Yeah,
Is
we
that the one
talked
where there's
about-
like different game types per
There's
movie?
3 game types: Die Hard
That's
1, 2,
cool.
and 3. They're all different games.
Yeah, they're
Fun.
all completely separate. But Die Hard 1 was the best one. And like
I
played
there
with
was
Vengeance
the
how
most.
many hostages you save like per level.
Mhm.
And like we always laughed because there's one hostage that is always inevitably just on fire. So it shows you like every individual hostage that you save. And it's just one guy just in flames, just standing there patiently waiting, and then he just walks away. Then yeah, like
Then
it's,
there was-
it is dumb now that I think about it, but at the time it was fantastic.
Are you talking about the high
It's
score screen at the
The
end
time
where
was
you
the
see
best
all
thing.
the
Yes.
survivors, and then you got to like shoot the letters of your name to put in your high score?
yeah.
So Nick's Digimon 2
so bad.
Revelation earlier. I think that game is terrible, but by God, I loved all those Digimon World games.
Hmm.
1 and 3 are still like they warm my little heart.
Dude, I just searched it to see like if I could find the pictures to see like what the gameplay looks like. This is the damn game. I've been wondering what the name of this game is for years, Alex.
Boom.
This is
I'm
what
gonna find
happens
an
when you bring me
emulator
on
for
the
that.
show. You just name a thing that you want to find, and I'll probably know it.
Mhm.
You
Oh,
know,
yeah, dude.
I once
Oh,
heard
yeah,
about this
man.
game, and you're just like, yeah, that's oh god,
Yep.
okay,
Yeah, that's
cool.
the one. Yeah. Digimon
I didn't
World
even
2.
describe
Gee.
it yet. I just said I played something once. Oh, you mean? Oh, well, yeah, okay.
Digimon Rumble Arena.
Get
I
out of
also
my
like
head.
that game sucks.
Yeah.
It's
I
so
had.
fun.
I
though.
think the only one I played was Digimon World 1. And I remember having like a similar experience of like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. This is really freaking complicated. I don't know
It's still
what.
complicated.
Like, oh my god, like it baffled me. Like I pre-ordered. I think that was one of the first games I ever pre-ordered. I
Oh,
was like, oh, Digimon, I gotta have it. And then like I bought it and I started playing it, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. I'm lost and I'm confused, and this I'm disappointed.
it was either Resident Evil 5 or Final Fantasy 13 that I remember pre-ordering. One was a great experience, and one was a very disappointing experience.
Of those 2 games, I'm curious to know which one, because a lot of people have very
Oh,
negative
RE5.
feelings on both of those games.
RE5 was definitely the
Heck
game that
yeah.
I like actually enjoyed thoroughly at the time. And Final Fantasy 13 made me mad because I didn't like it as much as I had hoped, and I also spent not only the like full $60 price, but I also bought the strategy guide. So I spent like $90 on this thing, and it dropped in
Yeah.
price like immediately.
Yeah, I hated that game. There was
love
one.
Final Fantasy 13.
What was I thinking about? That there was a game.
Quit in.
Oh right, Xenogears. I hate that I have to say this. I hate that I say this. Xenogears is like one of the classics. It's one of the best games ever. I understand that, but I wasn't prepared. Okay, I need you to understand this. I wasn't ready because like I went from Final Fantasy 7 to I need to play every one of these games, and all of them are relatively happy. There's some dark moments, but they're like way down the line. This game like starts with the whole village dying, and you see a kid, croak it in your arms, and it's like, yeah, that, and everyone blames you. Go kill yourself. Xenogears. I was like, whoa!
Game start.
I am not ready for this, Mom. Yeah, it was.
I need an adult.
Bad. Yeah, I remember I
An
got to
adult.
that point because all I had was the demo. I played the demo like a billion times and I loved every second of it. And then I got the damn game. I rented it, thank God. And I got through that first part of the village, and I was just like, drop the remote, just walked out of the room. Like, I don't need this. I'm like 7. I don't need this. This sucks.
Trying to remember the first time a game I was like emotionally like struck by. I think it might have been Final Fantasy VII, honestly, or Legend of Dragoon is one of the two because there's two
Legend of
major
Dragoon
character
is
deaths
so
in either
good.
game.
Yeah, the death of is it Alfred in Legend of Dragoon?
No, Lavitz. Alfred's the replacement.
Lavitz, right? Alfred replaces him, doesn't he?
I was hurt by that one because he was one of my
Yeah.
favorite characters.
Who's your
My first
boy?
username
My
everywhere,
boy.
Lavitz 105. That was my first username.
Yeah, that one, like, but at least in those games, again, like it took a while to get to. Xenogears starts with like
Straight
you
up.
I mean,
suck.
Legend of Dragoon starts with your whole village on fire and being murdered.
Yeah, but it didn't feel as
It didn't feel as
painful.
Wouldn't feel the same.
Yeah,
Dude, I
'cause-
like spent countless hours trying to figure out how to keep Aerith alive. Game Sharks, walkthroughs,
Oh yeah.
hidden playground secrets.
Oh,
It's like-
dude.
It really bothered me, like that she.
The hidden playground.
fights it.
Oh my god. Oh my god. I remember that. No. You have to go behind the big head, and like there's a
Yep.
box back there that you get materia, and you can save her life. I remember that. Oh my
There's so
god.
many little tricks, and none of it worked. But a Game Shark would work, and I spent hours putting in codes trying to get things to work just to save her. And so when Remake came out, and she survives through the entire thing, and kind of acknowledges that like maybe she knows in another timeline that she bites it, I bawled. I cried so hard at the end of Remake. So it really hit me emotionally. That might be the first time that happened.
Mm.
No,
Final Fantasy's
there've been
fine.
a few. Definitely
Yeah,
Last
dude,
of
Final
Us.
Mm,
Last of
it's
Us.
a little
that,
later, but
like,
yeah. Mhm.
yeah. Like that. By that point, I had already kind of known what these games could do.
Yeah.
But that one was the first time that like I remember for like at least 5 years, I had never heard the Last of Us theme song, which is to this day, I could just put that shit on and just rock out to it while on my way to work. But I had not heard it because I was so like just destroyed by that
Mhm.
opening scene.
That's a
And
very good scene. Yep.
oh, it's so perfect. It's so good. And I remember when I first got there, I was like, no, that's not how you do. No, you don't do it. And I'm just bawling.
Yep.
No.
There's something to be
that's when I was
said.
like, this is art. This is art. This is art.
This is-
Oh yeah. Oh,
I think
yeah.
one of the first games that like really got me, which like we could do a whole episode about Half-Life 3 if we ever get it or anything like that. But the ending to the episode Half-Life 2 episode 2, that like DLC where Eli gets killed by that machine. It's such an unexpected moment. And I'm playing this game thinking like, yeah, this is super fun. We're about to go and fight the big boss. And then this thing rocks up and kills Eli, and then it ends. And it's just like this shocking emotional moment. And the fact that we still, like, what's it been? 16 years and we still don't get any closure. Like that just hurt, dude. And I remember like I played that like I think a year
hard.
after it came out, and I was like, okay, when is 3? When is 3? We need 3. It's just like that just hit me because it was like
3
I
never
need
came.
the closure. I need them
That's
to say
why
what's
3 will
happening.
never come, because you'll never get that closure. So it'll always be that most devastating moment in your life forever.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about one of the games that I played that like maybe not reviewed all too well all the time, but a game that I think was a huge or series that I think was a huge part of my childhood was the Sonic the Hedgehog games.
Mm.
I absolutely lived for these games. Like I remember my grandmother bought a Sega Saturn, and like I would go over to her house because she had Sonic the Hedgehog 1 and 2. And I just like that's like my first gaming memories is playing that
Aw.
in my grandmother's house. And I absolutely loved it. Then, and I was gonna say this earlier, but it actually is a nice time to put it in here. There's a lot of the consoles that you guys were talking about earlier that were never actually released here in South Africa.
Mm.
So we never got
Oh.
like the N64. We never got the Sega Dreamcast. I don't think we had the NES. There was like a lot of those consoles, and the biggest one for me was that we never got the Sega Dreamcast. So
Mm.
I never got to play Sonic Adventure because that was
Sonic
not
Adventure.
available on any other platforms.
Oh.
And I'll never ever forget. My mom was at a store or something, and she saw like this magazine with Sonic on the cover, and it was a Dreamcast like walkthrough guide. I think she was like overseas and saw it overseas or something, but it was a Dreamcast walkthrough guide, and one of the walkthroughs in the magazine was Sonic Adventure, and I read through that like a novel, like multiple times, and I was just like, I was kind of vicariously playing this game through the magazine. It was so great. And then eventually, like back in I think 2017, I finally got Sonic Adventure on the PS3, and I was like, okay, this is probably
Oh
gonna suck
yeah,
because it's like an old game. But I loved every single second of playing that game. It's like the coolest thing. And I mean, I
yes,
was able to play like
yes. I love the closure of the story.
But it's such a happy
it's
ending.
so good. Some of my favorite games though were like those early 2000 Sonic games that like maybe are not the best reviewed, some of them, but like Sonic Adventure 2
Mhm.
was so good. My friend had a GameCube. I was able to finally play that. And then like Sonic Heroes was amazing. Everyone like I mean that's one of the good ones really. But then there's Shadow the
Mhm.
Hedgehog and Sonic '06. Now I know everyone's gonna say Sonic '06, terrible video game. At the time, dude, I loved it. It was like the coolest thing. I can look back on it now and be like, it's a terrible video game. It's terrible. But I just
We
some of my
don't
favorite
talk
memories are
about
just getting home
those
from school
ones.
and playing it. There's some
I
good
always love the
parts of it, but
character
yeah,
of
it's not a
Sonic.
great video game, but I love it. Sonic's
I
great, man.
remember
He's
being
endured
fascinated
so
about
much.
things that weren't available in my region.
Oh yeah,
That's
just the
definitely
Yeah,
fact
something.
that was it.
the
Yeah.
exclusivity that they did an entire episode about that on Frasier. That they were like, like,
Oh,
no, you
funny.
have to make,
Mm.
yeah, you have to make a bar that is like completely inaccessible. We're not going to put a name on it. There's going to be like guards at the front door. It's going to be locked. We're not going to let anyone in. And they're just, the exclusivity is what gives it that
Mhm.
drive. And there is a
Yeah.
lot of that. I follow a lot of YouTubers that talk about like like the hard to get games, and the games always
Yeah.
suck. There's a
Yeah.
reason why they're hard to get. Nobody wanted them, but they're like,
Mhm.
but it exists.
There's a lot
You
of
gotta get those.
So back in the day when I was talking about how like, ooh, where's the other 8 Final Fantasies? When I found out that 3 was only in Japan, I was really distraught by that. And so when they announced the DS version, it was a big deal to me. And when I got it for Christmas one year, I loved it. I never beat it, but man, that game was cool.
Yeah, 100%, man. Oh, man.
I'm so glad that Sonic story ended the way it did. That
Yeah, I
was
was literally
really
imagine
wholesome.
you see like, did you ever play Sonic? Did you get to play
Did you
Sonic?
get there?
I finally
Tell
got
me
to
you got
play it,
it.
dude. I still love Adventure, man. I still recommend it to anyone. Adventure's the best Sonic game.
Sonic Adventure was the first
It's
game I
so good.
got with my Dreamcast.
I'm still crossing my fingers and just hoping that Sega eventually says, you know what, fuck it, Sonic Adventure remake, let's make it happen, because that would be the hype shit.
So
I'm just so upset with Sonic Team because they keep making silly decisions, but we'll see where it goes.
Sega.
I haven't looked into this myself, but I keep seeing on Twitter people who are like, "Oh, I wish Sega would have made Sonic Adventure 3," and then they'll retweet the iOS one that just came out, and they're like, "Oh, maybe they already have." So maybe check out the Apple Arcade because apparently that might be it.
Oh man, Sonic Adventure. Like I remember being
Dude,
like
Sonic Adventure.
waiting
Oh
for my
man.
Dreamcast, pre-ordering the Dreamcast, pre-ordering Sonic Adventure, and
Speaking
that
of,
was like I played the bejesus out of that game. I recently went back to Sonic Adventure and tried playing the HD version that's on Xbox, and I'm like, oh, this is so fun, but god damn it, has it not aged well.
have you all
Like
heard of
this
Spark
Yeah,
the
it really
Electric
hasn't.
Jester?
Where?
Spark
Okay,
the Electric Jester. Is there a chat thing in this? I
I
don't
gotta
remember.
ask you, where the hell do you hear these games? What do you?
I mean, I work in PR for a reason, I guess.
Yeah.
Constantly.
Hey, have you
I'm
ever heard
gonna
of
put it.
Spark plugs and the Cugs?
I'm gonna
The,
put it in
the
the
fuck
Twitch
did you
chat.
just say? Like,
Nick, I need you to look at this at some point because the people who made Spark the Electric Jester basically were like, what if we made Sonic games like really good? And there's 3 different ones, and the second 2 or 3 are very much inspired by Sonic Adventure, and I think you'd really dig them.
I'll have to check them out.
Have fun. They're cheap.
Does anybody else have any like old bad games that they absolutely loved from back in their
I,
kids?
I kind of
Right.
like Super Godzilla. It was like a really confusing, hard to understand game, but just the fact that, Godzilla was so big and you fight Biolante, and
Yeah.
you fight Ghidorah in the Tokyo Tower. Like all that stuff was just.
I
so
remember
cool to
being
me.
a kid and like finding out that there were Godzilla games. I think the first time I ever played one of the Godzilla games was through emulation in my computer lab. Callback. And I remember like, oh my god, Godzilla, and I booted it up and I'm like, what? He there's like there's like a cinema. There's a cutscene of him walking through a city. I don't really seem to have control over anything.
It took a minute. Yep.
Yeah, it's just and I've recently replayed it and went back to it, and I was like, it started to click after a bit, but then even still, the combat's really confusing, and I'm like, how do I?
It's a random element.
What?
It's so weird.
Yeah, I'm like, yeah, it's definitely up there of like my Godzilla PS4 game. Not great, but I love it.
I wish I had that.
Oh.
So here's an interesting one. When Melee came out, a buddy of mine brought over his GameCube, and we set up I had a fairly large closet at my grandma's house, and we set it up to where we had our sleeping bags in there, and then the little TV at the feet, and we'd sit in there and we'd play, in our little cave or whatever, playing Smash Brothers Melee. And I had my PlayStation downstairs. And I tell you what, the game we spent the most time was not Smash Brothers Melee, that extended break. It was Beyblade on the PS1 because it was just so damn funny. Just playing Beyblade and hitting against each other and going back and forth.
Can't say Beyblade and not give me at least 5 seconds to go Beyblade, Beyblade, Beyblade. Okay, go on ahead.
It's such a great theme song too.
That was hype. I'm not gonna lie. That shit was hype.
It's got that
Dude, we could do a whole other show about our favorite TV shows from that era as well, like the Digimons.
I don't know why, but
Beyblade.
Damn it, we will.
Of an old game that popped in my head that I used to
we will.
obsessively play when I was a kid was Cool Borders 3.
Oh, dude! Man, Cool Borders was awesome.
There was that,
Nope,
and there was
that's
another
interesting.
game that I can't. What is it? Oh my god!
SSX Tricky.
Also snowboarding?
No, it was a
I was about to
downhill.
say SSX.
It was a downhill racing game where you could either use skateboard or skates, and you could play as just the most random creatures and characters. Why can't I think of
Was
it?
it a Disney thing?
No.
Okay.
It was basically Cool Borders, but it was like a spin-off of it. Why can I not think of it? It's driving me nuts. I had those games for the longest time. There was 3 of them at least.
Dude, extreme sports games are sick because it's like, oh, you've played enough Tony Hawk to unlock Mall.
Yeah.
You want to hear a funny cheat code story that just popped in my hand looking at the PlayStation thing?
Yeah.
So cheat code books were a thing when we were kids.
Oh, yeah.
And a buddy of mine had bought one, and it called me up and said, hey, do you have any of these games? And he got to Spider-Man on the PS1. And I was like, oh, I've got Spider-Man. That game's cool. And he's like, I have a crap ton of cheat codes for you. And we went one by one and hit all these cheat codes, and then got to the very bottom. And he's like, all right, and this one's eel gnats. It's for everything. I'm like, what do you mean everything? And he goes, I guess it's for everything. I'm like, so what was all the other things for? We spent 45 minutes on the phone putting in these codes one by one. At the very end, I could have saved so much time. And it never occurred to me that eel gnats is Stanley backwards until I was well into adulthood.
Dear God.
I'll never forget it.
The only thing that I can kind of compare with that one was a friend of mine in GTA 3 was like, would you stop eating out of the trash? Sorry, love my dog.
Man, your childhood was interesting.
Very interesting. There was what the hell was I saying? God damn it!
Your friend with
GTA
Grand
3.
Theft Auto 3.
Grand Theft Auto 3. We were putting in cheat codes, and we just kept on adding all the cheat codes because they would just pile on top of one another. And then there was one where it was everybody is aggressive, everybody has a weapon, everybody is invincible, and everybody has a rocket launcher.
Can you survive?
Now, keep in mind, this is before a time that it was really well known that you could break a system by overloading it with so much information. And next thing we know, we put in all those cheats, and then he goes, all right, I'm gonna push unpause.
Here we go.
Hold on to your ass. And he goes, unpause. And the game just goes, kick, 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 kick. And you just see the entire city go.
Yeah, it's the same explosions.
It was just explosion. And he tried surviving it, and he's running away. And there's this little old lady that comes out, beats him to death, shoots him with the rocket launcher, and then it ends with her literally striding away. It was this little old lady. It was the best moment in one of my lives.
I didn't know how to pronounce Grand Theft
lives.
Auto for a long time. A friend of mine was telling me about Grand Theft Auto 3, and I could have sworn he said something in Spanish. And I was like, what? And it took me a long time until I like saw it written out. I was like, oh, Grand Theft Auto. Got it. But to your explosion thing, we were playing Fallout 3 and my buddy got a PS3 and was like, oh, this thing is so cool. And he's like trucking along and all of a sudden, and the entire screen goes white and it crashes the game. And I was like, what the fuck was that? Turns out a super mutant had shot like a mini nuke or something and just blew his ass up.
Oh, I remember my first encounter with one of those. Like I saw the guy and I just see a thing go and then white.
There's so many memories like that.
So I'm sorry to cut everybody off, but we've gone massively off topic. We're going pretty long here. We kind of need to wrap things up. That's the problem when we get going like this, when things go off the rails.
Can't stop.
Nostalgia is a hell of a drug.
Nostalgia is a drug.
Totally.
The drug. But yeah, so we're going to...
What do you mean we're done, Dan?
No! Just like the last time you were here, Alex, it's like, all right, you got to come back for part dos.
Did we have a part dose for the other one?
No, we didn't.
It's coming up.
A sequel.
I slapped my arm really hard doing that joke. Commit to the bit. Damn it, that hurt.
It looked like it. Sounded like it.
Anyways, thank you so much for hanging out with us this evening. Thank you, Alex, for joining us for this wonderful conversation. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Louis.
Can I plug some stuff as we
absolutely. Yes, sir. Please, absolutely. Plug away.
So, Forever Classic Games is my main creative outlet. We do fighting game streams here locally in Minnesota. We just were at the Midwest Mix Fest. It was awesome. But over in foreverclassicgames.com, you can find an interview with Yuri Lorenthal, Tony Todd, and Najee Jeter that I collected here in Minneapolis at a convention, Twin Cities Con. And so that's there. And the full interview is available on our podcast, the Forever Classic Podcast. And there's a lot of cool things in the works. So yeah, go check us out. And then I work for Stride PR and do cool stuff during the day, like Ghost Runner.
Excellent. Yes, thank you for making sure I let you do that because I was missing it. Anyways, you're very welcome, sir. Thank you. Have a good night, everybody. We'll see y'all next week. We got something special coming at you. Bye.
Take care.